This channel is doing a giveaway courtesy of Monster Tech. Stay tuned for details on how you can win. I've been a long-time fan of Kyle Hill. If you somehow don't know who I'm talking about, it's this guy, the science channel with possibly the best locks of hair on the internet. And you know he knows that as well. Just look at the YouTube icon for his channel. Is this a science channel or is it an ad for L'Oreal? In a recent video, Kyle dissected the classic space battle trope that is all over science fiction. Since my content centers quite heavily on science fiction and space battles, I wanted to weigh in on some details I think Kyle may have missed. Now, I want to make very clear from the outset that I am not intending to discredit or disparage Kyle in any way. Rather, I want to add to the dialogue in a way that is hopefully constructive and enlightening for everybody. The great joy of being human is that none of us know everything and we can always learn from each other. And that goes for me too. There are a number of points where Kyle and I agree, full stop. One of them being that the 1940s dogfighting style carried over into much of modern sci-fi is not a very likely scenario in the future.
You once again get to blame George Lucas for something. Ever since Star Wars came out, became a global phenomenon, defined sci-fi as a genre, every single space battle and everything you've ever seen or read or played looks like a World War II dogfight. Now, it's not actually George's fault. He was pulling from 50 serials, which themselves pulled from that thing called World War II, and he wasn't trying to be scientifically accurate. But it's been 50 years since Star Wars came out. Science fiction has got a lot harder since then. Things should change and adapt as we learn more about physics and space.
As our weapons and defense technology has evolved across history, the engagement range has been extended over and over again. This is another point where Kyle and I find common ground. It's for this reason that the close and intimate ducking and weaving of two starfighters dancing around each other is much less likely to occur. However, I don't think it is a 0% chance it happens, rather just very low. As we'll get into a little later on, there are always exceptions to every rule. In the early 1800s, when naval battles were conducted with cannons and round balls, the engagement range was typically within 100 yards. With the advent of the conical bullet, optimizations in gunpowder chemistry, rifled barrels, and many more technological advancements, the engagement range was extended significantly. The mechanical capability of the weapon itself often preceded the ability to extract that potential. A good example of this is in small arms when Carlos Hathcock made a record-breaking ranged kill using a M2 Browning machine gun. This showed the capability of the 50 BMG cartridge as a potential sniper round and revolutionized long-range engagements. Another example in terms of aircraft would be the incorporation of reflector sights aligned to the plane's guns. In both of these examples, we get a hint of the interplay of technology and how one feeds into the other. If your rifle or gun or weapon system can reach farther than you can see to fire it, then you need a better targeting system, and vice versa. One area where I disagree with Kyle is the assumption that
there is no stealth in space. At any distance where attacking makes sense, everyone will see everyone else, even with today's sensor capabilities. Know everyone's mass and velocity, being able to infer their weapons and defense capabilities, and be able to predict destinations and arrival times. With no stealth, the engagement distance in a more realistic cosmic skirmish goes from this to this, further reducing the utility of a small fighter that needs fuel, life support, and constant affirmation from a rogue with a heart of gold about their haircut. Oh hey, look, a tiny ship coming at us with puny lasers from 100 million kilometers away. Nuke it and go about our day. In space, there is no horizon. With sufficiently advanced sci-fi sensors on every craft, there's no reason why small fighters would be able to see and target something a larger ship could not. Furthermore, with no horizon, any target will see any blonde-banged rogue squadron coming from literally millions of kilometers away and fire at them accordingly. The historical case of a bombing fleet suddenly appearing through the cloud cover ceases to exist. Again, space is not an ocean, and so there's no intrinsic medium advantage that small craft have over large craft. It's no longer a difference between small aircraft in the atmosphere whizzing around at Mach 1 and large aircraft carriers chugging across the Pacific. No, now in space it's all the same nothingness with zero friction. When you think about the possible utility of small fighter craft more realistically, the problems start to stack up faster than bugs in a Bethesda game.
Because of the vast emptiness of space and our extreme long-range detection abilities, he argues that you can't hide. I agree that it is tougher to hide, but I don't think it is absolutely impossible. If we look at modern engagements, we can see why. Today, dogfights as were common in World War II are a rarity. Most Air Force engagements occur between two enemies that never see each other with their eyes. We use a host of advanced detection methods ranging from sonar to radar to satellites. Each of these, though, do have limitations. Infrared, a technology that relies on the energy put off as heat from an object, can't see something that doesn't have a heat signature. Ergo, if you are able to mask the heat put off by your craft to a sufficient degree, an infrared sensor will not detect it. There's a number of ways to mitigate heat that you may be familiar with. You can dump heat into a reservoir, as in the case of liquid cooling a PC. You could run your PC for at least a time without fans as you let the water in your reservoir heat up. This won't last forever, but it would keep your PC from thermal throttling for at least a length of time. We can radiate heat in a direction that the enemy cannot see it. We can utilize heat shields that block the transmission of infrared light towards our opponent. If we know the defense capability of the enemy, and they happen to be wholly dependent on infrared heat, avoiding detection may be as simple as employing a big metal shield in front of our heat-generating components. We could also pick a trajectory that places a heat source such as a star or planet behind our ship so that our heat is masked by the larger background. Modern stealth aircraft employ these and a host of other methods to avoid infrared detection. Another method, radar, likewise has weaknesses.
In 2013, the most distant human-made object, NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft, was 18.5 billion kilometers away. This photo is of its 22-watt radio signal at that distance, taken by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory's Very Long Baseline Array. Clever name, engineers. It's proof that we can detect a signal as weak as your refrigerator's light bulb at the edge of the solar system.
Kyle points out that we were able to detect the Voyager probe in 2013. This is an incredible feat, as he points out. There's something here, though, that I feel is off. The probe, by virtue of its mission, was never hiding. It's also the only thing out there sending back the information we were looking for. Since it was launched, Voyager has been playing Marco Polo with us as it travels along, keeping in constant contact. That's a very different purpose than what you'd expect from a stealth craft evading detection. Our fledgling space authorities have the easiest time currently at deciphering signals as it will ever be. As space gets more and more cluttered, when we do eventually reach the density across the stars depicted in sci-fi, it will be significantly harder to keep track of them all. Think about how today we have air traffic control. It's relatively easy to keep track of a limited number of flights in the air, right? But that's not to say we never lose them at all.
The newest addition to the arsenal! You can't have this! I have this!
What if everyone had a plane? Would ATC be able to keep track of 7 billion individual aircraft? As an example, focus on the image of the radar of Voyager. As I move it around, try to keep track of where it goes. As more and more signals appear, it gets tougher, doesn't it? Now, this isn't exactly how signal tracking works in reality. We're not actually relying on humans to trace them out manually. But even today, with the relatively simple technology we have, we still run into issues. Who's to say then that in the future a potential enemy would not be able to mimic the signature of a friendly craft? Furthermore, as we see in the development of stealth fighters, there's a wide range of technologies that can be employed to evade detection. One of the simplest is geometry. If you bounce the detector signal away in a useless direction, you won't be detected. All electromagnetic waves have this flaw. If you use the right materials and the right combination, you may be able to avoid detection altogether. These serve as a few potential issues with the statement that there's no stealth in space. I want to point out, however, that this is done in reference to today's technology. We can take guesses as to what the future may hold, but until we're there, we won't really know. Is there some as of yet undiscovered technology that grants a massive leap forward in stealth tech? Possibly. So I'd caution against speaking in absolutes and grant a little more room for the unknown.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Speaking of the unknown, one technology that is theoretically possible is warp drives. We don't often think of a warp drive as a stealth technology, but if we do make one, and it enables faster than light travel, then you could arrive at your destination before the report of your departure in the form of information received as light. In this case, you would be undetectable until you deactivate the warp drive. Then, the stealth you gain is in the form of appearing from apparently out of nowhere. This could enable you to stage a large assault wing in the neighborhood of your opponent before they'd have time to react. Another point Kyle makes is against the utility of small spacecraft like starfighters. Quick note from Oddjob in the future in the editing bay, Kyle also mentions the extreme G-forces that you would be subject to in certain space fight scenarios. I don't think that this is quite as relevant because of what we're going to discuss a little later on, but I did want to acknowledge that that is another point that Kyle does bring up against small craft.
Imagine that you're in a small combat spacecraft. You're approaching a giant capital ship that has a laser cannon pointed straight at your little butt. Humans have a reaction speed of about a quarter of a second. So, how far would you actually have to be away from your target to reasonably start avoiding laser fire like you're Luke doing the trench run in the Death Star? Huh, almost got me. Huh, gotta be quicker than that. Light, the thing that lasers shoot out, moves at 300,000 kilometers per second. Multiply human reaction time by this value, and you get the minimum distance you would have to be from a laser weapon to get even close to being able to maybe evade it.
Kyle seems to argue in favor of larger, self-sustaining craft. I can see where he's coming from, but I think the humble starfighter still has some utility. I actually see a large parallel here and the Tarkin doctrine of Star Wars. The Grand Moff strategy was to consolidate resources into superweapons as opposed to a larger, spread-out Imperial fleet. Now, we all know what happened to the Death Star. Regardless of how it happened, there is something to be said about putting all your eggs in one basket. The larger your vessel, the more devastating it is if you lose it. Now, I don't think Kyle was arguing in favor of Death Stars over starfighters. Rather, he was arguing against starfighters for something in the middle of the size scale. But the logic still stands that the larger your vessel, the more devastating its loss. Diversifying your fleet has always been a favorable strategy, as it enables you to be flexible in your response and actions. Including smaller fighter craft likely still has a purpose for this reason. Another supposed point against starfighters are laser weapons. Lasers firing photons at the speed of light would be nearly impossible to dodge. In his video, Kyle uses an example reaction time of 0.25 seconds for the average human, multiplied by the velocity of light to approximate a minimum engagement distance for two starcraft. However, there's a couple details that I feel are overlooked here. First, both aggressors are subject to the same observer issues at these distances. If you're trying to hit a target at this distance, the information you have about their location is also 0.25 seconds older than reality. It's less about them dodging your assault and more about you being able to accurately predict their future location first. This isn't terribly difficult with modern computation, but there is an element of randomness as your opponent could change course at any time and there would be a delay before you are made aware of that. So far, the objects we observe at these distances don't make decisions. It's different calculating the trajectory of a planet versus an aggressor. Granted, this does apply to both parties, so maybe it's all a wash anyway. Lasers have another problem, however: attenuation. You've no doubt seen a laser pointer before. This is one of the most basic lasers, but they all follow similar principles. According to this formula, the beam will widen over distance. Intuitively, you know that if you shine your pointer at a distant object, the diameter of your beam is greater. With that widening, the intensity is dropping as well. This is important because if it drops below some critical value, it will no longer be effective against the enemy spacecraft. This shortens our engagement distance dramatically from thousands of kilometers to a few hundred kilometers. The US military has developed laser weapons for the purpose of pinpoint strikes and missile defense. One such example is the Boeing YAL-1, which had a claimed range of 600 kilometers against some types of ICBMs. I'm not saying that it's impossible to make a relevant space defense laser to ward off extraterrestrial threats, but it would be extremely hard to make one that is effective. It would have to be massive to have any real destructive range at the astronomic scale, not to mention the electrical power requirement is obscene to fire such a weapon. At that point, we are in fact advocating for a Death Star if our intention is to dispatch an entire spacecraft and not just tiny missiles. For these reasons, lasers may not be the trump card they at first appear. They do have some pretty serious limitations that would need to be overcome. I think for the most part, we can safely assume that the range advantage described in Kyle's video may not actually be there. If that's the case, then we do come back to more modern engagement distances with kinetic and ballistic weapons and missiles and the like. In many sci-fi scenarios, AI renders much of the advanced computation technologies obsolete and dangerous anyway. In these cases, the argument is that humans can't flip the same way. If such a scenario did occur where e-warfare progressed to a point that remotely controlled systems are a liability, then human pilots would have some advantage. The crashed F-35 from earlier this year is still a bit of a mystery. We don't know all the circumstances leading up to the pilot ejecting. Some theories have circulated that foreign agents may have sent the eject command remotely. Assuming that's true, that's a pretty good argument for closed-loop systems that can't be hacked. As of yet, humans can't be hacked, so if the future requires meat monkeys flying ships if only to avoid having our own weapons turned against us, that is a case for the starfighter. Another scenario where a starfighter may be just what you want is in the case of planetary invasions. Now you could do orbital bombardment, but that also sacrifices much of the resources that could be captured and leads to excessive death tolls. Much the same way as today we avoid using nukes and still rely on more conventional means of warfare. Every time some major weapon is developed, we assume that there will be no more need for what came before. But each jump in weapons technology raises the stakes on all sides. And that may not be what we are prepared for. In this case, the invader may opt to use something akin to blitzkrieg airstrikes to soften a target before sending in a larger security force to take control. This has the benefit of minimizing collateral damage, well, relative to nuking it from space.
It's the only way to be sure.
And protects the resources, both material and immaterial, that you are trying to control. A squadron of fighters is going to be harder to hit compared to a larger vessel. So even if the defending party does have a lot of ground defenses, a squadron of single-seater craft may stand a better chance of evasion than a singular ship. While the value of all human life is great, sacrificing a single pilot versus the entire crew of a larger vessel is part of that cold math. Now, there are a number of other ways an invasion could be conducted besides just the two described here, but part of military strategy is weighing the cost and benefit of any given tactic. My point here is rather to point out that it's not wise to say that there's never a purpose for a starfighter. This logic can also carry over to an assault on a large military installation, as we do see with the Death Star. Yes, we do have great anti-air capability, and much of that technology does carry over to anti-space weapons. But it's also logical to assume that as our defense technology improves, so too does an aggressor's offensive technology. You may get better detection methods, they may get better evasion methods. Unfortunately, regardless of how sophisticated a defensive array may be, it can always be taken down rather simply. One thing that may get overlooked in Return of the Jedi amongst all the intergenerational angst is the vulnerability of military technology to simple espionage and sabotage. In the case of the movie, it's a matter of deactivating a shield array, but it could be anything. It doesn't really matter how redundant your system is, or how many different strategies you employ. There is always a way through them. Ironically, the biggest weakness is often the humans in charge of such systems.
The human element of human resources is our biggest point of vulnerability. We should start phasing it out immediately.
Now, this may be confusing since I just touted us blood bags as being the answer to AI takeover. But we do still have weaknesses of our own. One of them is called social engineering. During his presidency, and again reiterated by his successor, Trump tried to ban TikTok for the sake of the potential threat it poses as a security breach. While it may seem like a rather benign platform, our devices constantly harvest tons of data about us. This can be compiled to wage cyber warfare on a grand scale. What if taking over your detection array of satellites is as easy as guessing the right person's password based on their information? This is relevant to the current discussion because it enables a scenario where a large invasion force could be on your doorstep without you knowing until bombs are dropping overhead. A carrier-type vessel equipped with a warp drive could carry a fleet of starfighters and drop out of warp speed in the upper atmosphere. Likewise, if your detection array is taken down by sabotage, you might just not see them walking up to you at sublight speed until they're actually at your doorstep.
Oh, you kind of snuck up on me there.
I am very, very sneaky, sir.
The fighters then lay waste to the defending forces in something aesthetically very similar to our sci-fi movies of today.
But Kyle, what about space piracy? That's in Starfield and that seems fun and somewhat plausible.
First of all, fun voice, no notes. Second of all, space piracy as a concept fails to the same arguments that small combat spacecraft do. Remember that even with today's technology, we can detect a spacecraft that could fit inside your home from billions of kilometers away. The old romanticized notion of a space pirate sneaking up on a cargo ship and ambushing them and then boarding them and everyone gets away and I have a heart of gold though. In a more realistic world, this just isn't possible.
Warning.
Finally, I want to touch on piracy. The most basic levels of piracy today are petty theft, carjackings, and small-time crimes like that. Criminals get away with these acts all the time. Yes, we do catch many of them, but not all. Some of them get away without any repercussions at all. For piracy to not be possible in some future scenario, it requires several things. First, you need a surveillance state robust enough to secure all relevant space within your jurisdiction and area of interest. That alone is very difficult. Kyle argues that we'd be using well-known space routes. While this is true, if we all have the capability to travel the stars, then you'd be needing to track billions, if not trillions of craft simultaneously. You also need an executive branch well enough equipped to react to nefarious acts. The carjackings of today could be space jackings in the future. It's not like nobody gets away with crime as it is today anyway. Finally, you also need a government that wants to prosecute crime. LA is a great example of what happens when you turn a blind eye and also serves as proof that government prosecution is not guaranteed.
That's true, because it's true.
If the solar system police force is not going to enforce the law, then the law doesn't really exist, does it? In conclusion, I think there's still a lot we don't yet know about the future of stealth technology, but evading detection and increasing our detection ability will continue to be an ongoing competition as time goes on. Lasers may not actually be able to push the range out far enough to render traditional military strategy completely obsolete, and there will always be room for closer tactics as well as sabotage. Just because you have amazing destructive power doesn't mean you'd be willing to use it, and starfighters may still serve a number of purposes. A completely controlled solar system is also a really hard reality to achieve, and piracy could still be very real threats given enough gubernatorial apathy for its denizens. Beyond what I've described here, I think there are still more arguments that could be made in either direction, so let's have a conversation below. I look forward to seeing your ideas in the comments. In fact, if you want a chance to win the set of chair or desk mounts from Monster Tech, talk to me below about how space combat will be similar or different from what is commonly shown in science fiction. Monster Tech makes solid products for sim enthusiasts, and whatever you need for your sim pit, they've got you covered. They're offering my viewers a 5% discount on all orders using code ODDJOB at checkout. We're keeping this giveaway going until we hit 1,000 subscribers. At the time of this recording, we're 88% of the way there. That is absolutely insane, guys. The support is greatly appreciated. I also recently activated memberships on the channel. There is currently one tier, the Quantum Moisters. We'll keep adding perks based on community feedback, but let me know what you want to see. With all that said, this is OddJob Entertainment, signing off.